The autumn wind whistled through the cemetery's maple trees, scattering crimson leaves across the granite headstones. David Chen stood motionless before a small grave, his calloused hands clutching a worn teddy bear, Tommy's favorite. 10 years had passed, but the pain felt as fresh as yesterday. The polished stone read Tommy Chen, 2008 to 2018, beloved son and dreamer. A distant church bell tolled, its somber notes carrying David back through time. 20 years ago, he'd been just another face in the crowd, and a consultant with a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. His clothes came from discount stores, his car was a used Honda with fading paint, but none of that had mattered. He'd had Tommy, and Tommy had been everything. Still wallowing, little brother. The sharp voice cut through David's reverie like a knife. Without turning, he knew who it was: Marcus Chen, his older brother, whose Mercedes G-Wagon had just purred into the cemetery parking lot. Even here, even now, Marcus couldn't resist making an entrance. "This is a place of respect," Marcus, David said quietly, his eyes never leaving Tommy's headstone. Marcus's expensive leather shoes crunched across the fallen leaves as he approached. "Respect? Is that what you call this decade-long pity party? Some of us have actual lives to live, businesses to run." The contrast between the brothers couldn't have been starker. Where David wore a simple black coat and jeans, Marcus was dressed in an Italian suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. His perfectly styled hair and manicured nails spoke of a life spent in boardrooms and country clubs, while David's weathered face told stories of late nights and endless worry. Their relationship had always been complicated. Growing up in a working-class family in Flushing, Marcus had been the golden child, class president, business school graduate, Wall Street success story. David had chosen a different path, pursuing his passion for technology and innovation, even when it meant a smaller paycheck and his parents' quiet disappointment. "You know, Mum and Dad always wondered where they went wrong with you," Marcus continued, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "All that potential, and what do you have to show for it? A dead-end job, a tiny apartment," and he paused, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Well, we all know how that turned out." David's fingers tightened around the teddy bear, his knuckles white with restraint. The familiar mix of grief and rage bubbled up inside him, but he forced it down. Tommy had taught him better than that. Tommy, with his endless optimism and brilliant mind, had shown him that true strength wasn't in fighting back, it was in rising above. Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered overhead, matching the darkness in David's heart. But beneath the pain and despite his brother's taunts, something else was stirring, a spark of determination that would soon ignite into a flame powerful enough to change not just his life, but the lives of thousands. Before the illness, David and Tommy's life had been filled with simple joys. Every Saturday morning began the same way: chocolate chip pancakes shaped like rockets, followed by hours of tinkering in their makeshift workshop in the apartment's spare room. Tommy had inherited his father's fascination with technology, and together they'd build everything from remote-controlled cars to primitive robots made from recycled parts. "Dad, look, I made it better," Tommy would exclaim, showing David his latest modification to one of their projects. His bright brown eyes would sparkle with excitement as he explained his improvements, often seeing solutions that even David had missed. At just 10 years old, Tommy's brilliance was already shining through. The first signs were subtle. Tommy started getting tired more easily during their workshop sessions. His usual boundless energy dimmed, and dark circles appeared beneath his eyes. When he began having trouble holding his screwdriver steady, David knew something was terribly wrong. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt: juvenile metachromatic leukodystrophy, an extremely rare genetic disorder. The doctors explained it in gentle terms, but the reality was brutal. Tommy's nervous system was slowly deteriorating, and there was no cure. "How much will the treatments cost?" David had asked, his voice trembling. The numbers were staggering. Even with insurance, the specialized care Tommy needed would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. David threw himself into working overtime, took out loans, and sold everything of value he owned. When that wasn't enough, he swallowed his pride and approached Marcus for help. "You want me to throw good money after bad?" Marcus had scoffed in his corner office overlooking Manhattan. "Maybe if you'd chosen a real career instead of playing with computers, you could take care of your own kid." Tommy's decline was rapid, but his spirit remained unbroken. Even as his body betrayed him, his mind stayed sharp. From his hospital bed, he filled notebook after notebook with drawings of medical devices he imagined machines that could help other sick children like him. "Promise me you'll build them someday," Dad Tommy whispered one night, his voice weak but his eyes intense. "Promise me you'll help other kids get better." "I promise," Buddy David had responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll build them together." But they never got the chance. Tommy slipped away on a quiet Sunday morning as the first rays of sunlight painted his hospital room in gold. David held his son's hand until the end, watching as that brilliant light that had illuminated his world for 10 precious years finally flickered out. The funeral was small. David couldn't afford anything elaborate. He stood alone by the tiny casket, surrounded by a handful of nurses who had grown to love Tommy during his final months. That's when Marcus made his grand entrance, 15 minutes late and reeking of expensive cologne. Well, Marcus announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I guess this is what happens when you can't provide proper care for your child. Maybe if you weren't such a failure as a father, we wouldn't be here today." The nurses gasped. David's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent. Tommy deserved better than a scene at his funeral. "Nothing to say," little brother Marcus pressed on, adjusting his designer tie. "That's right. Just stand there quietly, like you always have. You couldn't save your son, and you can't even defend his memory. Pathetic." As the casket was lowered into the ground, David placed Tommy's favorite teddy bear, the one they'd bought together at the Natural History Museum, beside it. His tears fell silently, mixing with the earth that would soon cover all that remained of his beautiful boy. But in his pocket, David clutched one of Tommy's notebooks, its pages filled with childish drawings of healing machines. Those drawings, born from a dying child's hope to help others, would soon become the blueprint for something extraordinary, though David didn't know it yet. The months following Tommy's death passed in a grey haze. David's apartment, once filled with the sounds of laughter and tinkering, now echoed with emptiness. Tommy's workshop remained untouched, gathering dust a shrine to broken dreams and unfinished projects. Every night, David would stand in the doorway, unable to step inside but equally unable to close the door. Work became impossible. His mind would wander during meetings, lost in memories of hospital rooms and beeping monitors. Simple coding tasks that he once handled with ease now seemed insurmountably complex. His supervisor had been understanding at first, but patience had its limits. "I'm sorry, David," his boss said one rainy Friday afternoon, sliding a severance package across the desk. "Take some time to heal. When you're ready, I'll be happy to give you a reference." The severance money didn't last long. Between the remaining medical bills and monthly expenses, David soon found himself forced to downsize. His new home was a studio apartment in a run-down building in the Bronx, barely bigger than Tommy's old hospital room. The workshop equipment had to go into storage, another monthly expense he could barely afford. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to take perverse pleasure in David's downward spiral. He'd accidentally run into David at their parents' house during holidays, always with a new barb ready. Still living off unemployment, Marcus would ask, swirling expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. "You know, I'm hiring a janitor at one of my buildings. Even you might be qualified for that." David took whatever freelance work he could find, but his reputation had suffered. Word got around about his emotional instability and clients became scarce. Some nights, dinner consisted of nothing more than ramen noodles and bitter memories. The lowest point came when he had to sell Tommy's telescope, the one they'd used to watch meteor showers from their old apartment's roof. As he handed it over to a pawnshop owner, something inside David broke. That night, he sat on his threadbare couch, clutching Tommy's notebook of drawings, and considered ending it all. The call that changed everything came at 3 a.m. It was Sarah Martinez, one of Tommy's favorite nurses from the pediatric ward. Her voice was tired but urgent. "I'm sorry to call so late, David, but I remembered how good you were with computers. We've got a situation at the hospital." David found himself in the pediatric ICU an hour later, surrounded by the familiar beeps and hums of medical equipment. Sarah explained their problem. The patient monitoring system kept crashing, forcing nurses to manually check vital signs every 15 minutes. "We're stretched so thin already," Sarah sighed, rubbing her eyes. "And when we're busy with one patient, we might miss warning signs from another. Last week, we almost lost a little girl because her stats dropped too quickly between checks. As David worked to patch the system, his eyes kept drifting to the young patients in their beds. One boy, about Tommy's age, clutched a tablet computer, using it to communicate since his condition made speaking difficult. Something clicked in David's mind. Later that night, unable to sleep, David pulled out Tommy's notebook. Among the childish doodles were surprisingly sophisticated concepts: wireless monitoring devices, user-friendly interfaces, systems that could predict problems before they became emergencies. Tommy had seen the need for better technology during his own illness, and his innocent drawings held seeds of genuine innovation. David's hands began to shake as he spread the drawings across his small kitchen table. He remembered Tommy's final request: "Promise me you'll build them someday, Dad. Promise me you'll help other kids get better." For the first time since Tommy's death, David felt truly awake. He grabbed a pen and began to write, expanding on Tommy's ideas, adding his own technical knowledge. The sun was rising when he finally looked up, surrounded by pages of notes and sketches. His eyes were red, but his vision had never been clearer. This was it. This was how he would keep his promise to Tommy. This was how he would give meaning to his son's suffering. He might have hit rock bottom, but as he stared at the drawings before him, David realized something profound. Sometimes you had to hit bottom to find your foundation. David's tiny apartment transformed into a makeshift development lab. His kitchen table disappeared under a sea of circuit boards, wires, and Tommy's original drawings. He slept on a mattress on the floor, having sold his bed to buy components. Every spare dollar went into his project, which he'd named TommyTech, though he kept that detail private for now. The first prototype was crude: a wireless vital signs monitor that could track multiple patients simultaneously and predict concerning trends before they became emergencies. David worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. When his laptop died, he coded on paper, using the public library's computers to digitize his work. "You're out of your mind," said the first investor he approached, barely glancing at his presentation. "The medical device market is locked up by major corporations. You've got no experience, no credentials in the field." The 10th rejection hurt less than the first. The 20th barely registered. David kept refining his prototype, using feedback from Sarah and other nurses who'd known Tommy. They became his unofficial focus group, pointing out practical issues he'd never have considered. "The interface needs to be simpler," Sarah advised. "We don't have time to navigate multiple menus during an emergency." David remembered how Tommy had always emphasized user-friendly design in his drawings, making him smile through tears as he rebuilt the interface from scratch. 6 months in, disaster struck. A competing company announced a similar monitoring system. David's heart sank as he watched their sleek corporate presentation. But then he noticed something: their system was complex, expensive, and required special training. Tommy's vision had been different: simple, intuitive, accessible. David maxed out his last credit card to rent a booth at a small medical technology conference. He couldn't afford professional displays, so he created demonstrations using salvaged tablets and his own handmade signage. Most attendees walked past his humble setup, but Dr. James Wong, a pediatric specialist, stopped to listen. "Show me again," Dr. Wong said after David's demonstration. He watched intently as the system predicted a simulated crisis 2 minutes before traditional monitors would have detected it. "You know what this means? In pediatrics, 2 minutes can be the difference between life and death." Dr. Wong introduced David to his network of medical professionals. Suddenly, people were listening. A video of his prototype in action went viral in medical technology circles. Small hospitals and clinics began reaching out, interested in an affordable solution that could save lives. The breakthrough came when Sarah's hospital agreed to a pilot program. David installed his system in their pediatric ICU, working nights to monitor its performance. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. In the first month alone, the system prevented 3 potential crises by alerting staff to subtle deterioration patterns. "Where did you get the idea for this?" a reporter asked during the pilot program's successful conclusion. David pulled out Tommy's worn notebook, showing the childish drawings that had started it all. The story: a grieving father building his dead son's dreams, touched hearts and opened doors. A venture capital firm specializing in medical technology finally took notice. Their initial investment wasn't huge, but it was enough to hire a small team and move into proper office space. David insisted on keeping Tommy's original drawings framed on the wall, reminding everyone of their mission: the company grew steadily. David's team expanded Tommy's concepts into a comprehensive patient care system. They developed additional modules, one for early detection of genetic disorders, another for monitoring post-operative recovery in children. Each new product incorporated suggestions from frontline medical staff, maintaining Tommy's vision of practical, accessible innovation. Recognition came from unexpected places. A prestigious medical journal published a study showing that hospitals using TommyTech systems had significantly better outcomes in pediatric care. The Gates Foundation reached out about implementing the technology in developing countries. "What sets your company apart?" asked a business magazine interviewer. David gestured to Tommy's framed drawings. "We're not just building technology, we're fulfilling a promise. Every device we create has to be something a child could understand, because a child designed the core concepts. We're just making his dreams real." 3 years after that night in Sarah's hospital, TommyTech had installations in over 200 hospitals. The company's revenue crossed 8 figures, though David continued living modestly, channeling profits back into research and development. His team had grown to 50 people, each one carefully chosen not just for their skills, but for their commitment to the mission. The industry giants took notice. Several attempted to buy TommyTech, offering increasingly large sums. David declined each offer, remembering Tommy's words, "Promise me you'll help other kids get better." This wasn't about money, it was about keeping a promise. Instead of selling, David established the Tommy Chen Foundation, dedicating a significant portion of company profits to providing medical technology to underfunded hospitals. Each installation included a small plaque with Tommy's photo and one of his original drawings, ensuring that his spirit of innovation and compassion lived on. One evening, as David locked up the office, he noticed a small boy watching their latest prototype through the lobby window. The child's face lit up with curiosity and wonder, reminding him so much of Tommy that it took his breath away. "Would you like to see how it works?" David asked, opening the door. The boy nodded eagerly, and as David demonstrated the system's features, he saw the same spark of imagination that had driven Tommy to fill his notebook with drawings of healing machines. In that moment, he knew that success wasn't measured in dollars or installations, but in the lives they touched and the dreams they inspired. Headlines began appearing in major publications. "TommyTech revolutionizes pediatric care. Father's love drives medical innovation." The man who turned grief into hope. David's story resonated far beyond the medical community, touching hearts across the globe. But while TommyTech's valuation soared past $500 million, then $1 billion, David remained focused on the promise he'd made at his son's bedside. The company's headquarters moved to a gleaming tower in Manhattan, but Tommy's presence was everywhere. The main lobby featured an interactive display of his original drawings, showing how each childish sketch had evolved into life-saving technology. The research and development floor was named Tommy's Workshop, and every new employee learned the story behind their mission. "Success hasn't changed you," Sarah remarked during one of her frequent visits. She'd joined TommyTech's advisory board while continuing her nursing work. "You're still the same David who used to bring Tommy his favorite comic books during hospital stays." But David had changed, just not in the ways people expected. The crushing grief that had once threatened to destroy him had transformed into purposeful energy. He'd learned to smile again, especially when visiting pediatric wards where TommyTech systems were helping children, just like Tommy. "Your son's legacy is extraordinary," a CNN interviewer told him during a prime-time feature. "How does it feel to know his ideas have saved thousands of lives?" David's eyes misted as he answered, "Tommy always said he wanted to be a superhero when he grew up. I used to think that was just a child's dream, but he became something better. He became hope for other children fighting their own battles." The breakthrough that pushed TommyTech's value into the billions came from an unexpected source. Tommy's last notebook, the one David had never fully read because it was too painful. One sleepless night, he finally opened it, finding detailed drawings of what Tommy had called a healing helper. It was a comprehensive monitoring and treatment system that could adapt to each patient's unique needs. David assembled a special team to bring Tommy's final vision to life. They worked tirelessly, combining artificial intelligence with Tommy's intuitive design philosophy. The result was revolutionary: a system that could not only monitor and predict but also suggest personalized treatment adjustments in real time. As TommyTech's stock price skyrocketed, David found his net worth crossing the $1 billion threshold. Financial magazines clamored for interviews, wanting to know his investment strategies and business secrets. But David's answer remained constant: our success comes from staying true to a child's vision of what healthcare should be: simple, caring, and focused on the patient. The money brought freedom to expand Tommy's legacy in new ways. David established research grants for rare pediatric diseases, funded children's hospitals in underserved communities, and created scholarships for medical students dedicated to pediatric care. Each initiative carried Tommy's name, ensuring that his spirit of compassion and innovation lived on. Personal healing came in unexpected moments: in the thank you letters from parents whose children had been saved by TommyTech systems, in the drawings sent by young patients who'd been inspired by Tommy's story, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing his son's dreams were helping others. Standing in his office one evening, looking out over the city lights, David held Tommy's original teddy bear, now carefully preserved in a special display case. The company's latest financial report showed a valuation of $3.5 billion, but the true measure of his transformation wasn't in the numbers. It was in the peace he'd found, in the purpose that drove him forward, and in the knowledge that Tommy's brief life had created ripples of hope that would continue long into the future. "We did it, buddy," he whispered to the teddy bear, his voice thick with emotion. "Your healing machines are real, and they're helping kids everywhere. You're still changing the world, every single day." The billions in his bank account meant little compared to that truth. David Chen wasn't just a billionaire, he was the keeper of his son's dream, the builder of his son's legacy, and through that mission, he'd found something far more valuable than money. He'd found healing. Marcus's Porsche looked out of place in TommyTech's visitor parking space. Just as he looked uncomfortable sitting in David's waiting room, gone was the trademark smirk, replaced by an unfamiliar nervousness as he fidgeted with his Italian silk tie. "Mr. Chen is ready to see you," David's assistant announced, her tone professional but cool. She'd heard the stories about Marcus, had seen the old photos of Tommy's funeral where he'd stood sneering at his grieving brother. David's office was simple. Despite his wealth, the only extravagant feature was the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Tommy's original drawings lined one wall, and his teddy bear sat in a place of honor on the desk. "Hello, Marcus," David said quietly, not rising from his chair. Little brother Marcus began, then stopped, his practiced charm failing him. "David, I've been trying to reach you." "I know." David's voice remained steady. "My assistant keeps excellent records of your calls, your emails, and your attempts to schedule meetings through various business contacts." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You've done well for yourself." "Very well. I always knew you had potential." "No," David interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "You didn't. You told me I was worthless. You mocked my son at his funeral. Let's not rewrite history, Marcus." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of pain and regret. Marcus's eyes drifted to Tommy's teddy bear, then to the wall of drawings. "I was wrong," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "I was so wrong, David. About everything. About you. About Tommy. I thought success meant making money, crushing competition, being the best. But what you've built here," he gestured to the drawings. "This is real success. You've saved lives. You've honored your son, while I've just made money." David studied his brother's face, seeing for the first time the toll that years of ruthless ambition had taken. "Tommy used to ask about you," he said softly. "He wondered why his uncle never came to visit. Even after you refused to help with his medical bills, he never stopped hoping you'd show up." Marcus covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I can't change what I did. I can't take back what I said. But David, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." David rose and walked to the wall of drawings, touching one gently. "You know what Tommy used to say? Everyone deserves a second chance, Dad. That's why we're making these healing machines." He turned to face his brother. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Marcus. That will take time. But Tommy believed in second chances, and dishonoring that belief would mean dishonoring him." Marcus looked up, hope flickering across his tear-stained face. Could we start over?" "No," David replied. "We can't start over. But maybe we can start from here, with the truth between us, and see where that leads." The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Tommy Chen Children's Hospital drew thousands. Families whose children had been saved by TommyTech systems stood alongside medical professionals, journalists, and civic leaders. The building itself was a marvel of modern healthcare design, every detail inspired by Tommy's original drawings, from the kid-friendly monitoring interfaces to the cheerful robot assistants that roamed the halls. David stood at the podium, his heart full as he surveyed the crowd. In the front row sat Sarah, now the hospital's chief of nursing, alongside Dr. Wong, who'd given him his first real chance. And there, somewhat to the back, stood Marcus, who had quietly donated a significant portion of his own fortune to fund the hospital's research wing. 10 years ago, David began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. My son Tommy drew pictures of machines that could help sick children. He didn't know about market feasibility or return on investment. He just knew that other kids were suffering and he wanted to help. He gestured to the massive display behind him, showing Tommy's original sketch next to the hospital's ultra-modern facade. People often ask me about the secret to success. They want to know how a grieving father with nothing but a notebook full of children's drawings built a multi-billion-dollar company. The truth is, there was never a secret. There was only a promise to a little boy who dreamed bigger than anyone thought possible. The crowd listened intently as David continued. This hospital isn't just a building. It's not just a collection of advanced technology. It's a testament to the power of pure intention. Every room is equipped with systems that grew from Tommy's imagination. Every treatment protocol is designed with the compassion and simplicity that only a child could envision. He paused, touching the teddy bear pin on his lapel, a miniature version of Tommy's beloved toy. But the real miracle isn't in the technology. It's in the lives that will be changed here. It's in the families who will walk out of these doors with hope instead of heartbreak. It's in the children who will grow up to chase their own dreams, because Tommy's dreams gave them that chance. Marcus stepped forward when called, his hands trembling slightly as he presented the first grant from the newly established Marcus Chen Pediatric Research Fund. My nephew, he said, his voice thick with emotion, taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we touch, the hope we create, and the legacy we leave behind. The hospital's first patient was wheeled in that afternoon, a young girl with the same condition that had taken Tommy. Thanks to TommyTech's advanced diagnostic systems, she'd been diagnosed early enough for treatment. She clutched her own teddy bear, a gift from the hospital, as David knelt beside her wheelchair. Your machines are like magic, she whispered, eyes wide with wonder at the child-friendly displays around her. No, David smiled. They're like Tommy. They help people because that's what they were born to do. As the day drew to a close, David found himself in the hospital's rooftop garden, a peaceful space where patients and families could find moments of respite. Marcus joined him there, both brothers gazing out over the city as the sun set. He would be proud, Marcus said softly. Not just of the hospital or the technology, but of you, of how you carried his love forward. David touched the garden's centerpiece, a bronze sculpture of a young boy holding a notebook, his face turned toward the horizon. Tommy once told me that when he got better, he wanted to build things that would make everyone better. He didn't get that chance, but he gave that chance to countless others. Below them, the hospital hummed with life and purpose. In rooms filled with Tommy's healing machines, children were getting second chances. In corridors decorated with his artwork, families were finding hope. And in every corner of the building that bore his name, a little boy's dream of making the world better lived on. The autumn wind still whistled through the cemetery's maple trees, just as it had that day 10 years ago. But this time, David Chen wasn't alone at Tommy's grave. Marcus stood quietly beside him, both brothers holding fresh flowers. The polished headstone now bore in addition a small bronze plaque depicting Tommy's first drawing of a healing machine. Remember what you said to me here, David asked softly, brushing leaves from the stone. About being a failure. Marcus flinched at the memory. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. We both were, in our own ways, David replied, surprising his brother. I thought wealth meant having enough money to save my son. You thought it meant having enough money to feel superior. Tommy knew better than both of us. He knew that true wealth was in what you gave, not what you had. David placed Tommy's old teddy bear, now carefully preserved, against the headstone. Its fur was faded, but its eyes still held that spark of hope that had characterized Tommy's brief life. Beside it, he set a folder containing the latest reports from the Tommy Chen Children's Hospital, thousands of lives saved, countless families given hope. "You know what's strange?" David continued, his voice gentle in the cemetery quiet. "I'm a billionaire now. I have everything I once thought I needed to save him. But Tommy didn't need saving, he was saving others all along. Every drawing in his notebook, every idea he shared, he was leaving behind a legacy bigger than any fortune." A young family walked past, heading to another grave. Their child wore a TommyTech monitoring device, one of the millions now ensuring children could live safer, healthier lives. The parents nodded respectfully, recognizing David from the news. "The media calls it a rags to riches story," David said, watching them go. "But that's not what this is. This is a story about a little boy who dreamed of helping others, and how that dream turned out to be worth more than all the riches in the world." The setting sun painted the cemetery in shades of gold, catching the words on Tommy's plaque: "Dream bigger, love deeper, help always." Below these words was a simple sketch: Tommy's first healing machine, the one that started it all. "Son," David whispered, touching the plaque gently, "you did it. Your healing machines are everywhere now, helping kids just like you wanted. You're still changing the world, every single day, and I promise you this is just the beginning." As the brothers turned to leave, a fresh breeze rustled through the maple trees, scattering golden leaves around them like nature's own tribute. In that moment, David felt Tommy's presence, not in the sadness of loss, but in the joy of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. Some would say David Chen's billions made him wealthy. But he knew better. His true wealth was in the legacy of a little boy who taught him that the richest dreams are the ones that help others, and that the greatest fortune isn't counted in dollars, but in lives touched and hope restored.